Today is November the 15th, 2023. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. Along with me is Ben Pollard, a retiree of the Oklahoma Conservation Commission. We're in Stillwater, Oklahoma, to speak with Greg Scott regarding his work in conservation. He has been practicing as a soil scientist for well over 40 years with the Oklahoma Conservation Commission since 2013, and prior to that with the Natural Resources Conservation Services, 1976 through 2013.
Yes.
Greg is also an alum of OSU. Today's interview will be part of Oklahoma's Conservation Heritage Oral History Project, which is a collaboration between Oklahoma Conservation Historical Society, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. That's a mouthful. So thank you for talking with us today. Before we get into conservation, let's learn a little bit about you. Start wherever you like.
Well, thanks for the invitation. I grew up in Oklahoma City, spent most of my time outdoors and out of town, but grew up hating the city. And as a teenager, kind of cut my teeth on John Muir, Aldo Leopold, Rachel Carson, and had this thought in the back of my head that I wanted to be a scientist, but I wanted to be outdoors. And so as a kid growing up in the late 60s and early 70s, my dad said, "What are you going to do when you get out of high school?" I said, "I'm going to go to OSU and enroll in ag school and find something to do that's not here." And he said, "That's good because you were moving out either way." So without any knowledge whatsoever, I enrolled at OSU in the agronomy program. And Dr. Matlock was the head of the agronomy department. That's Ken Matlock's father. And it was small enough back then, they treated you pretty much as a family in the sense that they wouldn't let you starve, but they would give you a job. And you can tell me if this is off subject, but one of my first jobs was working in the sorghum department. And my bosses were a couple of grad students that would make me ride in the bed of the pickup in the middle of winter going down to Perkins to hand harvest sorghum. But in the course of about 4 years, I wound up in the soil survey, or in the soils department, getting my most intensive stuff in soils. And worked with an older soil scientist who had retired from the Soil Conservation Service, whose name totally escapes me today. But he was doing soil survey work for the OSU on their land. And he took me to the field, and I got to liking it and thought, well, I could do this. And to be honest, it was nothing more than his recommendation to Bobby Birdwell, who was the state soil scientist and just recently passed away, to hire me, because they wouldn't have hired me otherwise. And so I made it through 4 years of school and did all of my applications with the Soil Conservation Service and got hired.
Was it the only job you applied for right out of college?
No, but there weren't a lot of jobs in 1976. But I got hired. Roland Willis was a state conservationist. And coming out of World War II, all of the federal service had a real strong military bent and culture to it. So I got a letter from the SCS that said, "You shall report to Sayre, Oklahoma." I had no idea where Sayre was. And my roommate just fell off the couch laughing. We all thought Southwest Oklahoma was a desert.
Yeah.
And so I reported to Sayre and went to work learning to do the work of a soil scientist. And even after 4 years and getting your degree and thinking that you're ready to go to work, a degree just barely gives you enough knowledge to get started, because nothing in the real world looked like what we studied in school. It was way more complex.
What were some of your initial tools that you were using to do in those days?
The tools in soil survey hadn't changed much up until that time. A shovel and a hand auger and a probe truck and stereo photography was what we used to go out and dig holes and get lines on the landscape and identify the soils. It was an interesting job, and it still is. I mean, I'm easily bored. And so almost every day, you'd go out by yourself. You'd have an assigned area to look at, maybe a section of ground, dig holes, get your lines on the map and identify the soils, and then be ready to defend your work, because the party leader or the state office would come and look at it, and you'd have to argue for your quality against their judgment, you know. The soil survey, historically, the need for information and knowledge about soils goes back to George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. The actual soil survey got organized sometime in the late 1800s. It predated the Soil Conservation Service, but it was actually under the, I think, USGS, or it wasn't in part of agriculture, but soil science really was more of a legacy from Russian scientists that started studying soil. Dostoevsky, I can't remember his name, but those ideas, you know, were brought to the U.S. And soil science as a profession didn't come into its own until much later than, say, engineering. But the ideas behind soils and landscapes were developed even as the soil survey program was building products for people to use, you know, with information about soils. So it wasn't born fully developed. It was built through the late 1800s and the early part of the century. But the idea is that soils are natural bodies that develop on landscapes and certain parts of the landscape and occupy certain landforms, made it possible for us to go out and dig really a minimum number of observations and yet identify the landforms and the dominant soils that occur on those places. So as the system developed, some of our earliest soil surveys, the scientists had the option of identifying maybe 25 different kinds of soil in a county. So if you go to Cimarron County, that old survey just has 25 map units, which is really very minimal. If you go to our newer surveys, you might have 100, 150 different map units that we've identified that we can consistently recognize on the landscape. But the system, as it developed, got sidetracked by World War II. So all of the soil survey work that had been done up to then, and the soil survey had been incorporated into the Soil Conservation Service, the Soil Erosion Service, and then the Soil Conservation Service. All of that work was put on the shelf for the duration of the war. And so in Oklahoma, after World War II, there was a hurry up and get it done mode. So they finished up a whole lot of work that had been set aside in World War II. But each county was scheduled and done according to the state soil scientists and state conservationists' priorities. And so when you look around Oklahoma, the actual date of a lot of the survey work, that some of it goes as far back as the 30s, but a lot of it is from the 50s. And then as the goal to get the whole nation surveyed once still hadn't quite been realized. There's some areas of Wyoming that have never been published.
Not even now?
No, not even now. But
I think, was it Oklahoma's first one in around Lakeview Follow or somewhere down in that area?
the first Oklahoma survey was the quadrangle that included parts of around Sulphur, Tishomingo area.
Down that, okay.
And those old surveys were done at a large scale, so 1 inch to the mile, very, very general in scope, but they were still soil surveys.
I think what Tanya was thinking about was not the last soil survey around McIntosh County that we had Leonard Solomon had a big celebration that Oklahoma had finished the once-over soil survey. Was it McIntosh or Muskogee?
It was in Muskogee County.
Okay, yeah.
We to celebrate the mapping of the last acre in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
We actually dug a 8x8 pit by hand on the station at Haskell.
Okay.
And had that ceremony and the plaque and everything. I think the bronze plaque is still there.
Uh-huh.
But I went to work at Sayre and helped finish up that survey. Jimmy Ford was the project leader, and he'd come back from Mississippi. And so he put up with me for 2 years. And as it turned out, Jimmy and I worked together almost my whole career until he retired. But we finished up there and went to Harmon County, which was far south. And Harmon County had an old survey on it that was pretty much out of date and done according to a different set of standards. So we did Harmon County. We finished, in the midst of doing Harmon County, I got the opportunity to go up to Alaska and do a field season south of Mount Everest in the glacier and peat bog and
That's a big change.
foothills of the Alaska range. We came back. We finished up
Go ahead.
Harmon County, and Bobby Birdwell came down and said, "Okay, you guys are finishing up. It's time to move." And he said, "Jimmy and Clay go to Woods County and start redoing that older survey in Woods County." And I said, "What about me?" Well, when I went to Harmon County, they say, "We know you don't want to be here, but give us 6 months and you will never want to move." And that was true. I was happy as a clam. But Bobby said, "Well, we need you to go to Muskogee County and help finish the survey there that's behind." And I told him what I thought about it. He said, "I've got a guy that wants your job. If you don't want to go to Muskogee County, I'll just give him your job." I went, "No, that sounds good. I'll be." So anyway, headed to Muskogee County, and it was an interesting place. It really was. I got to work and map all of that area around Weber's Falls, which is a really important cropland area in eastern Oklahoma. And it was interesting, but Muskogee was a different town. And I don't want to dish on anybody, but worked in Muskogee, and we got it done, and then had the opportunity to take the party leader job at Pawnee. So I was the project leader for Pawnee, and we're always in the midst of change. So one of the guys, Jim Henley, was at Perry, and he took a job at Paul's Valley. So Noble County had more cropland, and it was higher priority, so we suspended Pawnee County, and I went and finished the project at Noble County, and got done with that about 1991. Then the area soil scientist job at Woodward opened up, and I applied for that and got that. So me and Becky moved to Woodward County. Over the years, things, he mentioned about changing the name of NRCS. There was never a time when there wasn't change, constant change within the agency or within the survey. Because as science progressed and the rules, a lot of the rules we worked under and standards were always changing.
Mm-hmm.
So really, the field crews pushed for the ability to do more complex mapping, and the agency continued to recognize the need for that. So by the time we got done with Noble County, we had over 100 different mapping units of different soils in the county. And while we were, in 1986, we suspended Pawnee and I went to Perry. And lo and behold, there was a brand new 286 computer sitting on our desk. While I had worked at Sayre and Hollis and Muskogee, desktop computing had come into being. I mean, in 1976, I graduated OSU, and there was one computer on campus. It occupied the basement of the math building. It had no monitors. You just had piles of cards, and you would see students carrying piles of punch cards,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the computing. Well, all of a sudden, I walk in, and there's a computer sitting on my desk. So we were thrust into the age of doing our own manuscripts and typing and learn to use computers and databases. And that was exciting, and it was kind of the Wild West for a little bit. But in 1976, 7, and 8, you wrote everything out by hand and mailed it to the state office to be typed by a lady in the soils office.
Wow.
And then they got, quote, word processors. But all of a sudden now we were typing and printing all of our own stuff. We still did our maps by hand, still used aerial photos and stereoscopes. But I got done with Noble County and got the area job at Woodward, and got up there, and the area soil scientist job is kind of a consultant to all the field offices in the zone.
Mm-hmm.
In a sense, you've got an opportunity to build a practice, with those offices and their cooperators as your clients. But got to Woodward, and there was a massive, 386 computer with 300 megs hard drive and a tape drive, and we were doing GIS in 1992 using the program that the Army Corps of Engineers had developed. Before ARC or ArcView or any of those, we were using that GRASS program. So it enabled me to do a lot of analysis on soils and stuff that at a fairly coarse resolution, but still was getting involved in studying the geomorphology of the high plains and that whole area of the state. And pretty interesting. So in 1995, they announced a program, the graduate study program within the NRCS. And that graduate study program, they would pay for graduate programs to fill knowledge vacancies that we had within the agency. I said, that sounds kind of interesting. And talked to my wife about it and said, I would think it'd be neat to do geomorphology at OSU. So I called up Brian Carter, and I said, we got a geomorphologist at Stillwater because I don't want to do a master's in soils. I've been practicing in that forever. He said, well, call Jack Vitek. He's over in geography. And Jack was he was vice president at Whitehurst, so he wasn't in the department anymore, but he still had a few students. I called him up and visited, and I'd been working 20 years by this time. And said, would you be interested in being a chairman if I could get in this program? And he said, yeah, sounds fun. So I put in all my application and stuff, and the lady in Washington said, you'll never be selected. I went, okay. I'm still going to turn in my application. And because they paid for people to do all kinds of stuff. And that year, about a third of the people that turned in an application got selected to go to grad school, and I was one of them. So, Jack, everybody at OSU treated me like a professional who was coming back to school instead of the kid. And I really wondered how I was going to compete with all these younger people. But I realized that if you're 20, your priorities are beer and basketball and girls were ahead of studies. So I had that on them. I was disciplined. So the first semester I worked for Dr. Vitek. He took me to the bookstore and got a pile of books. Every 2 weeks I'd have to give him an oral report on the next book.
Wow.
So he brought me up to speed on a whole lot of geology and basic geomorphic stuff before we got into my other studies. And so he said, what do you want to do your thesis on? He said, you have to do a thesis and you have to publish. Okay. So I said, meet me out at Ames, southwest of Enid, and showed him a landscape that I'd been looking at that had a lot of interplay between fluvial and aeolian forces over the last few thousand years. I said, get after it. So we ended up coring 40 to 50 feet through sand dunes and ancient floodplain deposits and studying how that landform had developed. As you stepped down from Mino, there was about 10 levels of river terrace from Mino down to the river, and brought together information from a bunch of different scientific disciplines to argue for or against what I was looking at. Well, as it turned out, met a kid in one of the environmental science seminars named Ken Lepper. And Ken was developing optically stimulated luminescence dating on sand. So he was able to take a sample of a sand dune and do the hocus pocus with the radiation dose and the stored energy in the silica, and they'd shine light on it and it would shine back, and they could measure the energy, and he could tell you how long the sand had been buried.
Wow.
And so he said, take me to the youngest sand dune that you can find in Oklahoma. And we went just east of Canton on Highway 51. He said, how old is it? And I said, 500 years. Now he came back a few weeks later and he said, would you buy 150 years? Well, as it turns out, when you look at all of the historical data that's recorded for the Great Plains by people who traveled through the Kansas and the High Plains in the 1850s, turns out our landscape is actually quite active, but our lives are so short that we don't see that, and we also discount all of the testimony from the generations before us. It's like Jimmy Fry went, what it is what it is. It's always been that way. Yeah. But as the data has come in over many years, scientists in particular also have to be challenged that what we accepted as true quite often is not.
Mhm.
So there was a large body of scientists who figured that the landscape that froze at the end of the Ice Age was what we've had for the last 12,000 years. And it's always active.
Yeah.
And Don Wyckoff and Pete Thurman did research out in Roger Mills County that showed how the natives and the bison would move in and out of that western Oklahoma area on about a 500-year cycle. So anyway, between the soils data that we got and the dating sand dunes and dendrochronology and archaeology, all this stuff lined up, and had a good time doing this master's.
Mhm.
And the agency paid for it.
Were you having to work at the same time as?
I was hours that I wasn't in class or doing research, I was back at my job.
Okay, so,
Yeah. So
so you were burning the midnight oil from both sides, huh?
yeah, when Dr. Vitek said, turn your thesis in this date, I said, it won't be ready. He said, it won't be ready next April either, so turn it in. And so my wife drove me to Stillwater to turn it in while I finished putting all the pages together and the illustrations where they went in the thesis. So it was exciting, but a lot of what, to transition into the soil health stuff, a lot of what I learned in the process of getting my master's covered the ideas of system dynamics and having really active systems and everything working together. It prepared us to be able to move into the soil health idea. Just the idea that landscapes themselves are very dynamic, whether we're here or not, helped us to put together the ideas of how the whole system works. So I'll tell people that I'm a slow learner, but it took us 40 years to get to where we were ready to accumulate what we've learned in the last 10. Even the ideas of soil and how it develops form the basis of the soil health and the regenerative ag. But putting the pieces of the puzzle together have been kind of exciting.
Mm-hmm.
So I was at Woodward for 10 years. And then
That's a long time for someone to stay in one spot in this agency, from what I've gathered.
yeah, but I was the area soil scientist there for 10 years. And then because I had done my thesis work, I owed the agency 2 years at the location of their choice. But in the transition between me starting my program and finishing, budgets had collapsed and a lot of things had fallen apart in Washington. And they had a whole bunch of us graduates that they didn't know what to do with. So Sherm Lewis and 2 other guys in Washington. Sherm had left Washington, but the director of soil survey and another guy put together a deal to fund a soil survey office on the campus at Langston, to be an office to update the surveys for the whole MLRA, Cross Timbers, and Rolling Red Prairie major land resource areas. And they did this unilaterally without consulting the state. And only 3 people applied for the job. And one of them I had trained, and the other one was much younger than me. So I called up my sponsor in Washington. I said, if I get this job, will this pay back my obligation? They went, yeah, we take that. Well, they called me up and hired me for the job. Again, there was no consultation with the state. And as it turns out, they had not gone through the proper channels to establish a USDA field office in Langston. But I took the job and got down and started building an office that would serve an area of about 10 million acres. And that was the first one in Oklahoma, but since then, that concept has been expanded to where there's an office in Woodward, an office in Altus, an office in Stillwater that update soil surveys over large areas. And the eastern Oklahoma is actually served by soil scientists in Missouri and Arkansas and Texas. So the structure of the soil survey changed over the years. And when we moved to Langston, we didn't know how things were going to shell out. And as it happened, the soil survey office ended up in Stillwater instead of on campus at Langston. But I had several years there where I was had a good time doing some soils work, but also being the guest speaker for some of the classes there at Langston. Ray Fawcett was the soils professor, and so we got to be good friends and enjoyed each other's company, harassing the kids.
You might further explain this transition from county soil surveys to these major land resource areas, because that was a big change in the system.
Yeah, in the previous system, every soil survey for a county was a standalone product.
Yeah.
It didn't really mesh with the other counties because they were all different ages. And again, they were done under different sets of rules.
Yeah.
So the lines and the names may or may not match. But there was a demand on a nationwide basis for continuity between counties and across state lines.
Yeah.
And that demand, in a real sense, was a part of the way people were using soil data and using soil data to model great big areas and great big processes. So when you didn't have interpretations that matched, it was confusing and conflicting in sometimes.
Yeah.
So when we began to give people the job of smoothing out these problems over large areas, they could go back in and update a set of mapping units in a county or a group of counties so that they were consistent all across the major land resource area. What was the rest of that question?
No, that got it.
And at the same time, and this was part of while I was working on my master's, part of my job when I was over at Stillwater doing classes, then I would go over and assist and monitor the geography section, which was the contractor for Oklahoma to transfer a lot of the old soil surveys to topo quad boundaries and get those lines consistent. And so the students that worked for geography were actually doing that. And then that stuff was scanned and geo-referenced. And so in the midst of all of this work, the survey was being digitized for the National Soils Database so that now I can get on the computer and go to any location in the nation and find modern survey work. So then we need to have the lines match up, the information needs to match, and so both the spatial and attribute database were all being updated together. And
So for those of us who don't know, what does a soil survey entail? I mean, it's whatever you hand in. What's in there?
The soil survey, is the aerial photo with the lines and the polygons that identify the soils or the groups of soils. But attached to that soil, which might be a state soil, port silt loam, 0 to 1% slopes, occasionally flooded. Well, attached to that is information on cropland productivity, natural vegetation, rangeland information, engineering attributes, hydrology. It's almost like falling down a rabbit hole when you go to to the soil survey website and see how many different layers of information there are and how an interpretation is information that is derived off of the basic physical and chemical characteristics of the soil. So there would be an interpretation for a house with a basement, or a road, building a road.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago, my cousin said, we're looking at building a factory in some town in North Dakota. And so I popped it up on the soil survey, and I said, well, it's nice sandy material, but it has a water table of 3 feet. He said, you can tell all that from a survey? I said, yeah, it's free too. So this is a huge inventory of soils in the United States that is one of the few investments that the government has made that is worth many times more than what they paid for it. And so now our soil scientists are actually they're active in making sure that the information in the database is correct, but also in developing new interpretations for new uses of the soil. So what if I needed to put a septic tank with lateral lines and treat my waste? Well, my soil survey will give me a pretty good idea of what I can do.
Yeah.
So builders and contractors use that
If they know it's there.
if they know.
In some cases, consultants take the free information and sell it to somebody else.
So it's a little bit different from land surveying.
Yes, it's not. The land survey shows you your legal boundaries, but the soil survey shows you the soils that are there.
Okay.
Got a call today from a guy that says, I'm building a house northeast of Stillwater here. Well, the soils will tell us what the septic system can be. But anyway, in 2007, Chuck Sample retired as the assistant state soil scientist, and I applied for and got his job as the assistant state soil scientist. So there I was back working for Jimmy Ford again as my boss. So I was like his albatross, all those years. He retired in 2010, and I applied for and got state soil scientist job in 2010 and did that for 3 years. I was 58, and our boss was retiring, Ron Hilliard, and I thought it was a good time to retire too. So I was only state soil scientist for 3 years, but that particular job over the years had changed because from 76 up until probably about 2005, the state soil scientist supervised all the soil survey crews in Oklahoma. But when they began to make the change to an MLRA format, they reorganized the soil survey section, and the soil scientists who were doing soil surveys became responsible to work for the regional soil scientists in Temple, Texas. Or it was reorganized, and they pulled the state lost control of the soil survey and the employees that worked in the soil survey. So then the state soil scientist, his crew or her crew was the area soil scientist or zone soil scientist that worked as the consultants, around the state for the field offices. But the state soil scientist is really responsible in a lot of ways for the information that they have to approve, the information that gets put on the internet as part of the web soil survey. So they're part of the quality control, quality assurance to make sure we're not doing anything really dumb. So they still work with the MLRAs, but the state soil scientist is really just a leader and a proponent for soils within the state. I've been out of it 10 years, so I don't even know how it's developed since then. But when I worked for Ron Hilliard, as I was trying to get that job, he said, "Do you know what needs to be done at your end of the hall?" I said, "Yeah." He said, okay, you're hired. Well, I mean, we already knew each other. And he said, don't bring me any surprises. Let me know if there's something coming up. And about that time, and we had gotten involved in soil health in 2004. And it was kind of an epiphany. This is backing up. But I was still the project leader for the MLRA, the Rolling Red Prairie. Got invited to a tour up in Kay County of some no-till fields. And in the process, when I had left in 92 to go to Woodward, we actually saw what we thought of as Class 1 land, the very best ag land in Oklahoma, blowing away and still piling up in ditches. The wind erosion in Kay and Noble County was terrible. So in 2004, we went on this tour. We visited some farms in northern Noble County and Kay County. And one of the farms we went to, I had been on in the past, knew it well. And this producer had followed up a wheat crop with a no-till soybean crop, which meant he didn't plow it. He just cut the wheat and drilled the beans in. We dug a backhoe pit, and that soil was, the surface had started to rebuild the structure, and the soybeans were doing good, and that soil profile was full of water from a foot to about 4 feet deep. It's impressive. It was like that soil had come back to life. Well, we went about a mile away, less than a mile away, catty corner to another field that was perfectly level and was only used to grow wheat and was plowed every year after they cut wheat. And we had a pit there, and we were looking at the soils, and with every little breath of air, we just had clouds of dust coming off of that topsoil that was just powder. And there was a dead Pennsylvania smartweed growing next to the pit. And finally it hit me. And I said, what we're seeing here is a soil that is a swamp in the spring and grows obligate wetland plants. And water can't get through the surface into the subsoil at all. The subsoil was completely dry down to the bottom of the pit. And yet, catty corner in this field that is growing wheat and soybeans under no-till, it's full of water. So it was an epiphany about how fast soil could heal when we made some changes. Not that these ideas were unknown, but they were being rediscovered by American farmers. And that really just kind of was the tipping point. And from then on, most of our activities were centered around soil health and regenerative ag. And to be honest, Ron, we took care of our obligations, but he just let us run with it. Steve Allspaw was my assistant state soil scientist. And we were getting more involved with that. While we kept up with our things that we had to do for the national program, we still were able to spend most of our time with regenerative ag. Mm-hmm. So it was a shock to spend from 1976 to 2004 watching soil that we had managed to keep in place continue to degenerate and lose life and lose organic matter. I get in trouble for this, but I'll say it anyway. In 1934, the United States chose to approach soil conservation from a engineering mechanical perspective. Terraces, waterways, ponds, and drop structures, they were mechanical. We could have healed the soil so the water got in the ground and didn't need all those outside things. But what we did was we kept the soil in place. We did the windbreaks. We did all kinds of things. But the soil continued to lose life over all that time. So when some of these producers made these changes back as far as 1985, they were surprised at how rapidly the soil could come back to life. And to be honest, most of the people we call heroes today were broke in 1980 well, we're broke anyway, let's try something new. And they discovered how rapidly those changes would heal that soil and bring it back to life. So
Went from conservation to restoration.
yeah, we don't believe in sustainability, because if you start at the bottom, you can sustain that forever. But regenerative means we take the soil that we had and bring it back to life. The people that knew the most about regenerative ag and no-till were the Brazilians and Argentinians. And in one of their visits up here to our No-Till on the Plains conference, they said, here's what you can expect at 5, 10, 15, 20 years of regenerative ag. And after 20 years, you've got a stable system and you know what to expect. And they came back 5 years later and said, we lied. Because when you take a system that's been farmed traditionally for 100, 200, 300 years and begin to put these managements in place, it may change for another 100 years. And so regenerative ag means you've always got a moving target. Now, traditional ag is the same way, but we don't think it is. You know, in traditional ag, we think if I use a prescription of this seed with this fertilizer, with this herbicide, and this pesticide, I'm going to get that yield. But the truth is that from 76, when I came into the program, until we saw changes occurring, it still wasn't stable. It took more power, more tillage, more fertilizer, more inputs to get the same yield every year. But that kind of grows, you know, and you don't notice it as bad. So now with regenerative ag, we're always surprised when something pops up that we don't expect. And so that's the big challenge, is for producers to, there's going to be something new every year.
Well, there have been some surprises that you can share.
One of the surprises is that, you know, weeds, I think a big surprise, and this is real common with rangeland, is that the operative word should be don't panic. I've got weeds here in this native range that we've never seen before. They're going to take over the whole farm. Next year, they're not there. I mean, the seed bank is full of stuff that's going to respond to the weather and to my management. And the biggest thing to do is don't panic. Because a lot of those things are seasonal. They might show up once in 20 years. But we had a producer that went from spending $100,000 a year on herbicides to no herbicide. And the first year, it was absolute panic because all of these weeds that have been suppressed for 20 years blew up. Well, don't panic. It's like taking the cork out of a bottle of champagne. It'll take a while to settle down. And this was something that my work with geomorphology prepared me for, was that you have events that are disturbances that cause a big disturbance, and then harmonically they level out and balance out over time. So we're getting used to always, and whether we can anticipate it or not, we're getting used to always seeing something new. What do we do about this? I don't know. But anyway, in 2013, I left NRCS, and a few months later, the folks at the commission, who I'd gotten to know, you know, they said, would you be willing to work part-time? And Oklahoma had a pilot carbon program where Western Farmers Electric had paid producers in the North Canadian River watershed to adopt some practices that would begin to raise organic matter in the soil and study how that would work. And they paid them for the practices, with the idea of being prepared for if carbon credits ever became functional. And so they paid producers for carbon credits who were in the program, and some of the local conservation district offices had the verifiers that would go out and verify the practices. And from then, that program finished up in about 14. And we just started saying, we need to do soil health. We need to make a commitment to that. And I argued that soil health is going to be not fashionable, but it is going to be the answer to a lot of the issues that we're facing, because you can't continue to farm dead soil. You can't continue to live in an ecosystem without understanding the relationships between everything. 25, we tell this as a joke. 25 years ago, if I said everything's interconnected, they would say, "Get out of town, you hippie." And people would react like that. It would make us mad. But now we realize there are interconnections that we're just now starting to understand and take advantage of. For instance, last summer, down at Prague, we were looking at some pastures. The bare soil in the morning was 115 degrees. The soil that had a little vegetation on it was 100. But where we had vegetation and tolerated some ragweed or broomweed, the soil underneath that canopy was 85 degrees. And there was more moisture there than under the soil without the weeds. And we were getting germination already of our cool seeds and grasses in August. So the longer we go, the more we're understanding even the thermodynamics of regenerative ag and the values of all these different plants that we used to go, "Oh, it's a weed, kill it." And even in late summer, when most of the grasses have slowed down and the legumes have done their thing and stopped, those weeds are not that competitive, but they're actually still punching into the soil, putting a lot of organic matter and carbon back in the soil, and keeping that soil microorganism community active. So bad pun. We're just scratching the surface of what there is to learn about how these ecosystems work.
Yeah.
So you need to go back and get a PhD, sounds like.
Well,
or you already have one from experience.
Somebody asked me why I didn't do a PhD after getting my master's. The act of writing a thesis was so brutal that I love field work, but I hate writing. I talk better than I write. But when I told you that Dr. Vitek said I had to publish, as it turned out, I co-published Carlos Cordova and Ken Lepper used a lot of my stuff in the work that they published, and so I was able to get credit for being in those publications without actually having to put together too many journal articles. Because, like I say, writing is brutal, and so I was too old to think about a PhD.
Well, you still were doing educating people, though. I mean, even with I read somewhere where you did rain simulator. The
rainfall simulator.
Yes.
A friend of ours in Kansas invented this demonstration where we take 2-inch deep samples, 1 by 2 foot of different soils, or the same soil but different managements, and the pans are slotted so we can catch the runoff and the infiltration from all these different soil management techniques, and it basically rains on it, and in 10 minutes you can see what a 2-inch rain does to different land uses. And 50 years ago, when the soil was in better shape, it would react differently. But today, if you take a soil that's tilled and cut wheat, plow it up, let it bake all summer, plant wheat again, Or if you plant corn and then let it stay bare all winter, doesn't matter. The old idea was that that field is plowed, it's beautiful, it's resting, you know. Well, what it was really doing was dying. Because in the summer that soil is 140 degrees sometimes. But when you rain on a bare soil that has had the structure destroyed by tillage, the rain hits the ground at about 20 miles an hour, splashes up, the soil particles fall back down and seal. So in the first 10 minutes of an event, rainfall event, you build your crust, and the rest of the event is runoff and erosion. So you take that pan that's had 2 inches of rain on it and flip it over, you got dry dirt 2 inches down, soil, and and the rain's got about a half inch into the pan because that bare soil immediately crusts over. Whereas you take a sample from the same soil that's been subjected to no-till agriculture with the crop rotation or cover crops, and the development of the structure from roots and cracks and insects and earthworms, along with the protection from the residue, you can get virtually 100% of that rainfall event in the soil. And my story is that I'm selfish. When it rains at my house, I don't want to share it with you. I want all that water to get in the soil. And it gets used for plant growth and aquifer recharge and base flow back to my local stream. So the people in Tulsa that get my water are getting the clean water that's gone through the soil and slowly leaked into the creek rather than flood runoff. And we can change the way our soils function. But so when we talk about regenerative agriculture, we're changing the microorganism composition and population. We're changing the insect composition and population. We're changing the plant community that's on that site. We're storing more and more carbon back in the soil than we take out. This is not history, sorry. We're not sequestering carbon, but we are taking carbon out of the air and entraining it back in the soil so it can participate in the ecosystem. So we go air, plant, soil, back to the air, through the plant, in the soil again. And a small part of that builds up every season. And so we're putting carbon back in the soils where it's actually can participate. I'm scared when people say that we're sequestering carbon and not making it available to participate in life. And there's some companies that are doing that. So, what were some of my questions that we didn't talk about?
Well, what's your view on the current status of the soil health movement and how you're being received and how it's being accepted over the 10 years now that you've been doing this since you retired from NRCS?
The status of the soil health movement is, the soil health movement itself is very decentralized. There's a lot of money to be made, so there's a lot of businesses being built to create products and services that can be used in soil health, consulting, laboratories, trademarks. And so because it's kind of the Wild West, there's a lot of competition between different groups trying to trademark concepts and ideas and make it to where I could market my grain as regeneratively grown, proven to be on the soil health site, and has this seal that would give added value to that product, because a healthier soil will create a more nutrient dense product. The other side of that equation is that there's conflict between traditional agribusiness and the soil health business, because if you change your system and don't require as much machinery, fertilizer, and herbicide, then your supplier has to change their business to stay in business. And we all got these lessons in ag economics in college, and yet businessmen resist change because they've invested in an infrastructure and a product. For instance, a client of ours this summer has changed from high fertilizer use, high herbicide use, high equipment use to buying more, changing the vegetation in his pastures, overseeding it with perennial and reseeding species that will give him green year round. He says, I have less cattle than I used to have. I'm making more money than I've ever made, because he's not buying fertilizer, he's not buying herbicides, he's not spending as much on hay equipment. And so there's a lot of anxiety when you start to change a system that has relied on a lot of outside inputs. Yeah. Prior to World War II, the gross margin on ag products was about 60%. Today, the gross margin on traditional ag products is about 5%. And so producers, if they're not keeping real good track of their books, they don't realize how much it costs to farm to get a particular yield when they could make more money without all the inputs. There's a farm in Nebraska that they looked at the total amount of phosphorus in the soil. There was about 1,000 years of phosphorus from years of putting on lots of fertilizer that's gotten tied up and unavailable, that we can make a difference with that by changing the microorganism community and bringing it back to life to make some of these things available. That's a little subjective, but for instance, depending on how you measure it, I need 120 pounds of nitrogen on my hay met every year. But if I take credit for the nitrogen that's produced and delivered by my clovers and legumes and coming out of the organic matter that's being processed by my microorganisms, I need about 40 pounds of nitrogen. So that's a significant difference in expense. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the regenerative world is it's not in chaos, but it can be confusing. Yeah. There's plenty of people selling products that are very useful and some that are snake oil. And as a cynic, I've been surprised and confirmed both by discovering that things that I never dreamed would work make a huge difference in the way the soil works. And other times seeing products that don't make any difference. So
on your property, I'm assuming you own property.
Yeah.
Are you doing some of these practice things on it?
We've got a small property, 150 acres down in Lincoln County, and a herd of black and white cows. So we do grazing rotations, where we've got lots of paddocks and the cows occupy one while the rest are resting. And we've been experimenting with different kinds of plants that we could get out there and diversify the plant community so that we get nitrogen from the legumes, from the clovers and the veg. And learning what works and what doesn't, and being surprised at how well the system can heal, over time. So that a lot of, we've got a soil health group in the commission, but every one of the employees that's a part of that also has their own enterprise outside, so that they've got skin in the game, and actually have experience with it. trying to think of what else to say about soil survey.
Have you done one on your place?
Soil survey?
Yeah, your own.
And how accurate is it?
Well, the Lincoln County survey is from the 50s.
Mm.
And it is not very accurate. It's not, but it's not because the scientists weren't good scientists. It's because of the rules that they were working under, grouped so many soils together that you don't always know what you're going to see.
Mm.
Statistically speaking, this is a point of shame, Lincoln County is the most eroded county in the nation.
Yeah.
In the nation.
In the nation, because the particular intersection of history and politics and fragile soils, just kind of part of Lincoln County was part of Sac and Fox and Iowa tribal lands and maybe Kickapoo. Some of it was, I think, part of the 1892 run, but between the Homestead Act and the rules of the Homestead Act and the way Oklahoma was settled and the fact that Lincoln County has a bunch of shallow soils that are over sandstone, and the agriculture in the 1890s was cotton, corn, and you had to make a living. So there's just huge tracts of Lincoln County that are severely eroded. And that's, like I say, and my farm is no different. 2 or 3 feet of erosion on the hillsides and 8 feet of sedimentation on the floodplains. So all the good soils are buried by 8 feet of red dirt from the cotton farming days.
So
Speaking of Lincoln County, what possessed you to want to be on the Lincoln County Conservation District Board of Directors?
I was not seeking that position. I was recruited to come and participate and be on the Lincoln County Board. I got a young guy that works for me. I said, I got to go to a board meeting tonight. He said, what's that? I said, well, the Conservation District Board. He acted like he thought it was an honor. I said, it's not an honor. It's kind of a responsibility that you accept because you want to help out.
Yeah.
The directors all work for free. They pay their own expenses. They show up for, board meetings and area meetings and state meetings because they care about what goes on in their county.
Mm-hmm.
So he laughed. He was laughing about how hard ranchers work, and I said, I think I'm not the youngest on the board, but everybody on the board is ranches and farms. And I probably make the least out of my farm of everybody that's there. And I said, but there's guys that are 10 years older than me work harder than I do every day.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the conservation districts are important.
how did you pick that particular piece of land? Is it in the family or how?
We were moving back from Woodward to take the job at Langston. And at the time, land in Payne County was 3 times as expensive in general as Lincoln County.
Yep.
And land in Logan County was at least twice as much or more. The closer you get to I-35, the more expensive land was. And so we were close to giving up, and we saw a sign. My wife said, well, go look at this farm. And we pulled up and looked at it. And she said, they've already cut most of the cedars and bulldozed the gullies in, so it looks better than some of these farms we've looked at. And that's where we ended up buying.
Uh-huh.
I said, you can have a farm or a big house, but you can't have both. She said, well, I'd rather have a farm now. So we bought that piece of property and actually bought it from the second owners, I think, since settlement.
Wow.
How long will it take, or how long do you think it will take to recover the 8 inches or whatever
It's
in your lifetime?
depending on your standard. It's surprising. we started seeing a real change in the performance of the pastures as we diversified the vegetation. But it took several years before I started seeing a real difference in the way the soil looked. I don't think you could ever take a piece of property that damaged and make it, quote, like native. But you can make a huge difference in how it performs just a few years. We'll never achieve native vegetation on that property. There'll always be some exotic vegetation that we're not going to get rid of. Now, if I want to be sarcastic, I'd say, well, we've got Bermuda grass and Plains bluestem, and which are true. They are exotics because they're not native.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, the cows that we put there to graze are exotic too. They're all from Europe. Angus and Hereford and Limousin cows are exotic. So, it's you have to have a balance. But we do discover that the longer we go, the more native species move back in and are occupying positions in those pastures from outside. And as we can, we try to incorporate native species back in. And so slowly but surely the Bermuda grass has given way to the blue stems and some of the other natives because it doesn't compete well without a lot of nitrogen fertilizer.
Mm-hmm.
And cover crops, like the radishes that Scotty Harriman would talk about.
Since I don't have cropland, I don't do the cover crops, but our goal is to diversify the pastures so that in the fall we've got half a dozen different clovers and legumes germinating to grow through the winter. And then in the spring we've got a different group of warm season legumes that cooperate with the Bermuda grass. I particularly like eastern gamma grass, which is a native that's been mostly extirpated across the state by being constantly grazed. And it's a fantastic plant. So we've drilled it back in some of our pastures. It's ice cream for cows. It'll root 12 or 15 feet deep. It's an incredible plant, but it has to have periods of rest, between use. So, and we're all, we try different things out to see if it would work, and if it doesn't work, we don't recommend those to other people to try. So,
Is that some of what it's connected to what you do for the commission now?
it is.
Some of those.
It is. If we're giving people advice, it's nice to know that you can make it work before you recommend it.
Yeah. So when you retired from NRCS, did you anticipate going back to work?
Yes, but I didn't know what I was going to do.
Didn't know what you were going to do.
I retired and I said, I'm going to leave now, partially because I've got a good high 3 average on my salary, and partially because I've still got enough energy to do something fun.
Mm-hmm.
And probably, I don't know how this sounds, but I think that even after you get old, you should be useful and not just, live for pleasure. But I didn't really know what all was going to open up. But the commission called and said, you want to work a little bit? Some months I hardly work at all, and other months might be a couple, 3 weeks, but I do other kinds of consulting and do some cover crop seed work, seed mixes for people. But
And you do workshops for various places, like the tribes or?
Well, part of our job is soil health, is we do all kinds of workshops. There's a Noble County Cattlemen's is having a workshop Thursday evening, and me and one of the guys are going to speak at it. Don't know what we're going to say yet. So, yeah, we do talk about soil health about it anywhere that somebody will listen.
Yeah, I had read that you did a presentation of sorts at the People's Garden in DC.
Yeah, that was
And-
fun.
Yeah, in 2014 maybe.
I think so.
Does that sound right?
The Chesapeake Bay, of course, is fragile and at risk. Sediment, runoff, nutrients, chemicals. And so we did the rainfall simulator demonstration for them. But that region of Maryland and Virginia is pretty unique. It's almost somewhere between it's over 90% no-till agriculture with rotations and cover crops. And they've made a huge impact on Chesapeake Bay. And so you can look at what producers are doing and see that people who are normally enemies, National Wildlife Foundation, people concerned about Chesapeake Bay health, producers, discover that these actions on the part of the producers are helping everybody else in that region it's not damaging the producers' incomes, it's actually improving their resiliency and their income potential. And so agriculture can be a friend to all these other stakeholders by moving towards regenerative stuff. And you think about it, the cropland in that area has been farmed literally since the late 1600s. I can't tell you the exact date, but easily since the early 1700s, that land was tilled and farmed. So it had several hundred years of degradation before they started going back to regenerative practices. And a lot of those fields are literally within a stone's throw of Chesapeake Bay.
Need to be observant. And I was reading you are a certified soil scientist. That's
The American Society of Agronomy, Crop Science Society of America, and Soil Science Society of America have certification programs for professionals. And so I was a certified soil scientist from 1984 and actually until I turned 65 and got tired of paying my dues and doing my CCEs. I quit. I dropped my certification.
Was that required for your positions?
No.
No.
That was just something I wanted to do. But like I say, when I hit 65, I thought, I can quit paying some of this stuff.
And a profiler, a certified soil profiler.
If you're building a home or doing repairs to a septic system, you need to have a soil report to know what systems will function on your site and that you can do legally. So instead of a perk test where you just dig a hole and pour water in it, we go out and still dig holes, but we'll dig quite a few holes on the property to find the best spot and the best soils to install waste treatment. And then I do the designs based on that, and the installer takes that and works with the client to get their system installed. Waste treatment is just exactly the opposite of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis takes water and carbon dioxide and energy and makes sugar and everything else from that. Well, waste treatment just dismantles that and you get water and CO2 and energy back. But the energy is in the form of heat, and the bacteria do that work for us in whatever system that we're using. About 40% or more of homes in Oklahoma use a septic system to treat their waste. That's important when you compare it to a few counties in Alabama, where 70% of the household waste from rural areas goes directly into a water body without any treatment. So they have water quality problems that are very difficult to address because you've got waste that's going directly into bar ditch or a stream. And so in Oklahoma and around most of the country, the idea is that if we can treat our waste with anaerobic and then aerobic bacteria, completely dismantle it, the water and a few of the nutrients get used by the plants. And so instead of disposal, we've treated. And I could dig a very deep hole and put my waste down that deep hole, and I would dispose of it, but then I'd poison the water table. So the idea of waste treatment is to use biology to dismantle all those products of photosynthesis and all of our waste and use the nutrients in the system.
Similar to a compost pile, I guess, in some ways.
I mean, compost does the same thing.
Yeah.
It gives you a different product, that you can use. But so the soil profiling is me studying the soils and designing the septic systems.
Good side job, huh?
It is. It's about the year 2000. Some of the scientists, professional soil scientists, were working with DEQ to come up with a different system of designing septics than the old than the PERC test.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Carter, Brian Carter, was involved with that before he retired. He was the soils professor at OSU. And so they came up with this system of doing soil profile and designing the systems based on what we actually see in the soil in terms of color and clay content and sand content. So it makes a difference.
Yeah.
In your 40 years, you've seen quite a bit of changes.
Well, I have, and like I say, it literally did. Looked at soil for nearly 30 years and saw little clues and bits and pieces, but it finally didn't all come together until 2004, 2005, when we started seeing the big changes in soils with no-till and rotation and cover crops.
I have interviewed a farmer before that said he would taste it to see if it's what he needed to do. Have you heard of that? I don't know. But we didn't believe him, but he kept on saying yes, we did.
Soil scientists might eat a little dirt to feel the sand with his teeth, but you can take a bite of soil and taste the salt in it. The smell is important because the actinomyces has a certain odor, and that's one of the microorganisms that you want in your soil. So, now I don't know what else he was.
I don't know either. But and then with that part was part of the conversation. He liked to smell it when you plowed too.
I actually know a farmer who will go out to his fields and put some of his soil in capsules, and he'll take a couple of capsules of soil as a probiotic.
Really?
Yeah.
Each their own, huh?
Yeah.
Who knows? It might work. We don't know.
The more we learn about bacteria, make me think he's probably right.
Yeah.
The value of the earthworm too.
Earthworms are a neat indicator of soil health because they're kind of like Ben. If it's a good buffet, he'll be there. But if the buffet's not any good, he'll go somewhere else. Well, when you go out and dig a hole and find earthworms, you know that you've got an abundance and a diversity of food sources for those earthworms to be there. And in return, they burrow through the soil, and they give us the right amount of disturbance. They build pathways through the soil, almost in the sense of a highway through a neighborhood. Air and water can move in and out easily. And so as that earthworm abundance is there, and as they build tunnels, and those burrows don't disappear overnight. They'll last 5 years maybe if you don't disturb them. And one of the guys, Steve Allspaw, would take a picture of the soil, a slice, and see all of the earthworm burrows, put that in a GIS system, and do hocus pocus with the pixels and come up with a percentage of that soil that's full of those earthworm burrows. And like I say, over the years, one of the clues was no earthworms, a lot of earthworms. Over and over again, you see soils with no life in it. But as you begin to think more and more about the life in the soil, then you start noticing those things. And there's anymore, I'm probably not as much of a traditional soil scientist as I was 20 years ago, because we thought about taxonomy and classification, and we knew more about the physical and chemical parts of the soil, so that's what we keyed in on. But now it almost doesn't matter what kind of soil it is. You can be alive or you can be dead. So any soil can be brought back to life and made useful regardless, of what its taxonomy or classification or anything is. But we deal a lot with. Has anybody talked to you about the 5 soil health principles?
Nope.
No.
Well, none of these ideas are new. Sometimes they're rediscovered. A lot of range science understood these ideas 50 years ago. But producers started rediscovering them. And depending on who you talk to, we've all got our favorite. But the first and most important principle to me was plant diversity. These native landscapes, before settlement, or before white settlement, would have, Oklahoma's got about 2,500 native plants, but an acre would still have 100 to 150 different native plants, and would have always been green, less so during the winter, but still have a lot of green growing, grasses, forbs, legumes. And in that diversity, nearly half of the carbon that the plant fixes gets pumped in the ground. So the plant does that to attract bacteria and fungus to participate and be beneficial, to deliver nutrients and protection and water that the plant can't get. So the plant diversity, the more different physiologies that you've got, the more different organic chemicals that you're going to exude into the soil. And so when I can manage the plant diversity, then I re-diversify all of that underground ecosystem. So for me, that's number one. My cows and my plant diversity are my tools. The second, of course, is to manage the disturbance. Earthworms are a small disturbance. They're a constant disturbance, but they don't destroy the structure or the system. But plowing is a major disturbance. And plowing destroys the structure and destroys a lot of life and creates boundaries that water and air can't pass. I mentioned, how hot it can get in the summer. Having constant plant cover on the surface keeps it cool. And from a thermodynamic perspective, a soil that is covered with plants is cooler than a Walmart parking lot. Areas that are covered with plants don't create heat islands like cities do. And when you have a soil covered with green plants, photosynthesis is endothermic. You take that energy, you suck it into the plant, you turn it into sugar, it's trapped. But when sunlight hits a road, it's sucked into the ground and then re-emitted as heat. So bare ground and structures and pavement actually heat up the planet, whereas green fields don't. They actually cool the planet and can change the rainfall in the local area. So they're starting to get some ideas about how land that's covered with plants changes rainfall up to 40% within. Anyway, by plant diversity, keeping it covered, not disturbing it with plowing. The other thing is that you want to have a living root as much as possible because everybody eats every day or wants to. You and I don't think about it, but that underground ecosystem that supports our plants, without having green plants and fresh root exudates, it dies off during fallow periods. So we're always disturbing that population in terms of diversity and actually just bulk. You know, we would like to have about 10,000 pounds of bacteria per acre. And that's one of the things that changes first when you start to do regenerative ag is that you put a lot of investment back into that community. And then finally, after disturbance, cover, living roots, and diversity, these ecosystems developed with grazing animals. Our natural grazing population in Stillwater, Oklahoma would have been, bison, elk, deer, antelope, bear, beavers, badgers, bunnies. A very diverse and high population that, and the major grazer was the bison. They would eat, trample, move on, and then come back after that it had a rest. So animals are an important part of that because of how they process organic matter, how they encourage the plants to regrow and move nutrients around in the landscape. Some of these ideas haven't been studied that much, but say bison eat, poop, and trample on everything, and then come back later. And in that scenario, we end up with maximum production and maximum diversity. So farmers and ranchers are finding novel and imaginative ways to institute those soil health principles. But again, it's not new to the extent of being discovered. It was published from a range standpoint in a book in 1985 called Evaluating Indicators of Rangeland Health. But a lot of it was lost after World War II when we entered a period of herbicide chemical equipment development, production, and sales.
Sales, yes.
And to be honest, borrowing from an argument from a friend of mine in Nicaragua, when you have a war, a lot of generational history is lost, or generational knowledge is lost. A friend of mine was doing ag missionary work in Nicaragua, and they've lost such a large generation of men that knowledge of how to farm, sustain it, or indigenous farming was lost. So
that makes sense.
We've entered such a time where we're losing our knowledge of history or an understanding of the importance of it. We don't know what's got us to where we're at.
So we need you to tell more. Tell more people and tell more. Okay, cross timbers. We've talked a little bit. Your farm is in the cross timbers. And you were in the Blue Thumb calendar.
Oh,
He was?
In 2021. That's what I read.
yeah, I forgot about
I'll
that.
have to get mine out again.
One of the ladies in Blue Thumb came out to visit the farm, and she was amazed at the amount and the diversity of insects. I tend not to think about some of those little segments.
Yeah.
But if we're going to institute soil health, and I talk about all the life underground, I forget about all of the life above ground.
Yeah.
And so she was impressed with the insect diversity on the farm because we minimize, our chemical use. And then Scott Studley brings his classes out sometimes from Stillwater, and they were impressed with the bird populations. To me, they're just little brown birds, but they knew all the different songs and calls they were hearing, and so that when you start to make a healthy ecosystem, all the parts of that ecosystem recover, in the process. I mean, yeah, I see the scissor tails. I like the hawks. There's a few of the birds that we recognize and know, but they were impressed with the diversity there too.
Pollinators with monarch butterflies and all of that.
Monarchs are a good poster child for healthy insect populations in general, and most insects are beneficial. The pests become more of a problem in a system that's out of balance.
Yeah.
So as you begin to get the whole system back in balance, again, I always go back to plant diversity and the way we manage it. Then you start to see changes in insect problems. And I'll be honest, I don't know what to do about certain insect problems because I don't have them. Somebody said, "What do you do about armyworms?" I don't know. Because in that system, there's more predators to take care of them when they show up. So there's a lot of unintended consequences, and that's where the fun and the challenge is on regenerative stuff. Is that I didn't know until last year that blister beetles eat grasshopper eggs. And they said you can have a flush of grasshoppers followed by a flush of blister beetles, and then they might move out when they run out of food. So we always have grasshoppers? We always have grasshoppers. Have they been such a high population that they're damaging? No. It seems like if you allow the predators to come in, then again, don't panic, have a little patience. Usually, in the system, it'll work out. But we lean heavily on a lot of people around the world and don't necessarily come up with all these ideas ourselves, but we learn from each other and spread it around.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading that you were part of the To Which We Belong
Oh, yeah.
panel discussion afterwards. Talk a little bit about that.
That film Kiss the Ground was followed up by the film To Which We Belong. So the Oklahoma Association of Conservation Districts wanted to sponsor a showing of that film at the Rodeo Theater in Oklahoma City. Really not to make it available because it's on every platform on the internet. Every video platform has it. But by getting a bunch of people together in person, having a conversation and interaction, they thought that would be a good way to move the idea forward, that there's surprising things that can be accomplished. And Alejandro Carrillo, who ranches in the Sonoran Desert in Mexico, 30 years of experience in transforming a desert landscape into an arid grassland. He will be in Oklahoma doing 3-day-long seminars next year. So an advertisement for the Oklahoma Grazing Land Conservation Initiative, who you can find on Facebook, I guess. They're sponsoring him and another big field day to come to Oklahoma and talk about what he has accomplished and how he could make that work in high plains. So there in this realm of soil health, there's an amazing number of people doing amazing things. And yet, if you drive to Minnesota today, you'll still see millions of acres plowed after corn. I think there's less acceptance of it in the north, in the Corn Belt rather, than there is here. There's a lot of acceptance in the plains, from North Dakota down through the high plains and the Great Plains. But then you get into corn and bean country. There's still traditional plowing.
Wonder if that's because Oklahomans know what happens like through the Dust Bowl days and
It's
historically.
part of that is, but part of it is that Corn Belt agriculture is still, you can still make a living doing it.
Mhm.
They're not a, but in Oklahoma, it's always been riskier with lower profit margins than up in the corn and beans country. And that's an entrenched culture. Not much incentive to change.
Yeah.
But if diesel got high and corn got low, then you might see.
Yeah.
So your career is, you could thank to the professor at OSU that said, try this.
You can work as hard as you want, but everything we have is still a gift.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've been blessed by, at least I've been blessed by the gifts that some people have done. Like I say, that soil scientist that recommended me to work for the Soil Conservation Service.
Okay, that's, yeah.
You know,
Have you had a mentor?
through the years,
Yeah, one or two in particular.
gosh, multiple, I'd have to say. I mean, even today, we learn and follow people like Jonathan Lundgren and Christine Jones and Gabe Brown up in Dakota and Rick Bieber. A lot of folks that, you know, are well known around the world and in the U.S. We've been privileged to get to know them and learn from them and share ideas. I don't know, multiple mentors. Mr. Pollard, for instance.
I'm thinking you've moved, I was trying to count, 5 times maybe?
At least that many.
At least.
Sayre and Hollis, Muskogee, Woodward, Pawnee.
Perry? Or did you work in?
I worked in Perry while I lived at Pawnee.
And then Stillwater.
Yeah. I mean, in the history of the agency, there's some people that move all the time and others that stay in one place for 40 years.
Yeah, I think there was one of, did like 13 moves in a very short amount of time. Almost every year, it seemed.
So, like I say,
Yeah, so you had several different state cons, so Roland Willis and then Ron Hilliard. Who else?
oh gosh, there was,
Well, in that group, there's Bobby Jack Jones. There was
before Hilliard, it was Daryl Dominic.
Daryl Dominic.
Here.
And before Daryl, we had a state con. There was a watershed engineer, whose name I can't recall. He was the one that actually,
Ron Clark.
Ron, I think Ron gave me a recommendation for that graduate studies program. He said something once that was interesting. He said, the only plan that really matters is the one between your ears. When we talk about producers having a conservation plan, it's not what's on paper, it's what's in their mind that they plan on doing, that they think about and understand. Roland was there a long time after I was hired.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a lot of people dedicated a lot of time.
Yeah. And the work environment changed much over that's those 40 years, besides computers?
In 1976, it had a very strong line and staff organization. You communicated with your supervisor, but not with his 2 supervisors up. You didn't go call the state conservationist. As time went by, that organization was modified so that you had more access, to other people above you in the line organization, but also across from you in other professions. In 1976, if you wanted to apply for a job in Texas, you had to get permission from the state conservationists to even apply for another job. And if somebody tried to hire you within the USDA, they had to release you to that job, or they could tell you, no, we're not releasing you. Just because you had an opportunity didn't mean you could get it. One of my opportunities to go to Alaska, we were in the middle of wetland determinations. And Jimmy said, you got too much to do, get back to work. I went, oh, boss. A friend of mine called and said, can you come and map the Army base at Anchorage? I said, absolutely. And Jimmy said, you got too much to do, you got to stay here. So yeah, there's always been a constant flux in the rules. There was always changes within how the state was organized, changes in the structure, between the counties and the regions. When I started working, Oklahoma had 9 zones, and the area conservationist was the king in his zone, literally. There was about 40 soil scientists when I started working, and about 12 when I retired. While I was there, huge staffs that were building watershed dams came and went. A lot of the counties were reduced in the number of conservation workers, within the county. There's change has been constant, but I will say that anybody that had the opportunity to compare working for the agency with corporations or retail understood what a gift it was to work for the NRCS or the Soil Conservation Service. They were good jobs. They still are.
And it wasn't a 40-hour a week, 8 to 5, generally?
Generally it was, but a lot of people complained about their pay, but the security was much better than.
Yeah, that's true.
You didn't, even in the midst of the government shutting down, all the people that have had to go home during government shutdowns ultimately got paid for those hours anyway. So I mean, it's a secure working environment, and that's part of what gets you. Is that when they hired me, I thought I can last 10 years and we'll be sick of each other and I'll find something else to do. But 15 years later, I was maxed out on vacation and getting vacation and holiday and sick leave, and we would have to do yearly plans. So here's your 3 employees. What are you going to accomplish? You go, well, we've got 260 days. And after we lop off their 25 days of vacation and 10 days of holidays and 13 days of sick leave, you've already used up 1/5 of your year. And then you start planning what you can accomplish in 200 days. It's a good deal.
Good deal.
One of the guys that came to work for me, he said, these folks that came to work from a co-op down in Texas, he said, these people that are complaining about their job need to go work commercial for a while, and they'll appreciate coming to work for the NRCS.
Yep.
Do you remember the first female soil scientist for the state?
I think the first female soil scientist was Kim Oshesky.
I mean, what time period was it?
She was hired pretty close to when I was, and she worked for Ed Abernathy.
So in the 70s then?
In the 70s, yeah.
I mean, you had to have them trained in order for them to apply for a job too, so that didn't happen until a little bit later, so I'm just curious.
I mean, I think she went on to, she retired as one of the state leaders, I think, in South Dakota. But her career took her all over the country.
Could yours have taken you out of the state if you had so desired?
Yeah. I was hoping they'd offer me a job in Alaska on one of those trips, but they never did. Life conspires to sometimes to keep you where you're at. And I was pretty satisfied working in Oklahoma and families here, but I laughed at, I was thinking about the MLRA, the regional office in Texas in Temple. I said, "What do you think about going down to Temple, babe?" to my wife. And she said, "I didn't lose anything in Temple." and that was a good observation. It was, so yeah, we could have done something different, but with age and family and everything, it just worked out to be able to do that here. But I really enjoyed working and seeing soil, in other parts of the country.
Well, how did she? Well, I mean, she was your partner along for all those years too. How was your interaction with the? Well, that's not the right word either. Did she have any major concerns with the type of work you were doing, or supportive, whatever was she involved with the auxiliary and all of that other?
No, my wife is a nurse, and she's retired now.
Yeah, she's occupied other ways.
So she was able to work wherever we were at.
That makes mobility a little easier, doesn't it?
It did. No, she supported what I was doing, obviously, and we struggled together back when we weren't making much money.
Hey, we all do in that early stages of married life too, don't we?
Yeah, and we, in the sense that marriage always brings together people who are different. I was the guy that would move every 6 months, and she was the lady that would never move. So, so since we've been married, we've made about 3 moves. That's the way it works.
Right.
I couldn't have dragged her once a year all across the country very easily.
Had she been on a farm, or did she grow up on a farm? So she was familiar with that lifestyle too.
Yeah, she grew up. Her dad raised horses, and she raised them and broke them and trained them. And she said, "I broke horses, but they broke me back." And so yeah, we're very compatible there. We want to live out on the farm and away from town.
So what's your favorite time on the farm? It can be season or time of day, either one.
I think spring.
Spring.
I mean, right now, my worst time is brown trees. As soon as the leaves fall, I start looking for next year's buds.
Yeah.
It's cows too, green grass and cows. It's a little tougher in the fall and winter.
I have read that cows are social. Is that correct?
Oh gosh.
And that they like to be in a herd.
I got a friend out of Weatherford. He said cows are brilliant. You just got to learn to speak their language. And I think they are. They're an amazing creature. They're not dumb. I guess that's what you would say. Cows aren't dumb. They're smart animals.
They know the sound of your pickup.
Yeah, they do. I say to my shame. We don't feed very often, but they always check to be sure.
Yeah.
And I usually ask farmers too, do you have a pocket knife? Do you carry a pocket knife these days?
Look at there.
Like that?
Yeah. No, not very many people carry them anymore. So I'm just curious. And you're not afraid to get your hands dirty.
Well, that's part of what doing the soil profiles does, is it keeps my hands dirty.
I looked online for information about you, and almost every picture your hands were with a clump of dirt or soil. Clump of soil.
You want to wash your hands before lunch? No, that's just healthy bacteria. It'll be all right. One of the people we were listening to said, soil human colons and cows' digestive system basically all have the same groups of bacteria. So it's all good. Tell you something fun. Earthworms lay an egg, and the little bitty worm develops inside that little egg sac. So we do a lot of stuff with kids over the years. Sometimes we would do outdoor classrooms and give kids a shovel and say, go find something alive. This kid runs up to me and has got an earthworm in his little egg case fixing to birth. That's something that you rarely see.
Yeah.
20 years ago, you rarely saw that. Now you can see that a lot more than you used to, as those populations, diversify and come back. But that's exciting for a kid that's never hardly got his hands dirty to get to go out and dig holes. And in Oklahoma City, a lot of kids' lives are restricted to home, school, gymnasium. They don't even get to go out and play in the dirt. So getting to do that with students in the city is fun.
Maybe a future soil scientist.
At least appreciate the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And when we talk about soil health, that's just a handle for ecological health.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about the soil, it's about the whole system that is functioning together. But the soil is the place where it all touches. The soil and the plants and air and water and bacteria, the only place that they exist all together in a microscopic world is right there in the soil. Mm-hmm. So it's a unique environment, which you could argue that unique means in the case of Earth, it's the only one there. It's the only environment where all these things happen. And there is no plan B. If we don't have that, we still go back to some of our founding documents, which in the case of, there's a little booklet called Conquest of the Land Over 7,000 Years. And a guy named Loudermilk traveled all over the globe looking at ancient civilizations and why they failed or why they were destroyed. And in 100% of the cases, they were destroyed by soil destruction, primarily by erosion, but sometimes by military. And his work was interrupted by World War II. And that document was published after the war. But that document is still available in print and available on the internet as a PDF. And a lot of his observations are still true today, including the warnings, that he put in that document. So I just mentioned that so if somebody watches this, they might go read that.
Yes.
Sometimes you don't have to have something new to have something good.
Yeah.
That's true. Well, what are a couple of highlights from your career?
I would say when I think of highlights and things that were most fun, working in Central Alaska was an absolute, it was difficult physically, but we were in a great big plain south of Mount Everest, Denali, and you'd get in the helicopter. They always worked in pairs in Alaska, and so you get in the helicopter in the morning and go out to your work area and jump out of the helicopter and fly off, and you realize you're in the middle of 10 million acres of nothing. And the first day was kind of a shock, and the second day I looked around and I thought, I'm more at home here than I would be at the corner of Reno and Sheridan in Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
Knew what we were facing, and so it was not a pristine landscape, but very, very untouched with soils and wildlife that was so unique. and working in a group and with a group of people that got along and was really productive, and got to do some things like fly up on a glacier and take the day to walk around and look how glaciers work. Which we didn't make any production that day, but we'd gotten a lot done. The boss said, let's go up and look around this glacier. And to work in Alaska where the sun came up at 3 a.m. and went down about midnight for a while. It was so different and so primitive, Get up in the morning and find out a grizzly bear had come through camp and got into the ice box. And that was in 1980. In 1985, I worked in far southeast Alaska on Reveille Island by the town of Kahiltna, doing the same kind of stuff, mapping soils. In 85, it was for the Forest Service. But getting to go back to school was a highlight. But it was just neat work. I know this makes me sound like a soil nerd. It was really neat to see almost an infinite variety of soil. I mean, after you think you've seen everything, one of the guys came in one day and said, we need to go look at this farm up by Pawnee because I haven't ever seen soil like this. And this was in this would have been in 2006, maybe. So after 30 years, he took me out there and we looked at that soil. He said, what do you think? I said, I've never seen it either. Better take good notes, which is a long-standing joke, take good notes. But yeah, it's I don't know why, but it's kept me interested all these years. And even today, if I go work for a client and look at soil for a lot of for septics or something else, never seen this before. This client down in Norman, he went and looked on his farm, and he says, I'm having trouble getting grass to grow here. So we dug some holes, and I went, yep, never seen this in this position before. So there's just a nearly infinite amount of variety that makes it fun for me.
Some unknowns and then connecting the dots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's like building a puzzle, putting together a puzzle, from the observations, and that's part of it, I think.
So if you want to encourage someone to go into the biz, what would you tell them?
I would say it's a neat.
Even now.
Yeah.
Even now.
It's changed. Soil scientists today don't actually get to go see as much soil as we did because a lot of their time is spent working on the database in the computer still. But it's still a neat deal.
Any other questions, Ben?
I'm ready for the finale.
Do you have anything else you want to that we haven't covered that we should cover?
Gosh, I don't know.
Invasive Plants Council you've been on.
Yeah, that's. I'm still on it, but I'm going to let my membership on that go and replace it with somebody more active.
I think they've got all of mine, and they covered the role, the importance, and how it was developed. So I've got my list covered. So if you don't, my last question is how do you want people to remember Greg Scott?
Ben warned me about this. and to be honest, I've never I've never harbored the thought of being remembered. And the background for that thought is that even Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes that don't think too much of yourself because in a few generations nobody will remember you anyway. That's what he said. That's not an exact quote. So I don't know. We're all unique, but not many of us are going to be remembered very long.
Well, maybe as a person who cared about the soil
Yeah,
and life in general.
try to care about soil, but try to care about people more.
Well, it's that easy. That's that system. We're all connected, aren't we?
Yeah,
I like your quote in your emails. It's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit.
yeah. Of all people to say that, it was Truman.
Mhm.
I actually do believe that. You know, we can get a lot more done. And it sounds cliche.
I mean, for this whole organization, I get that impression that a good portion of the people that have worked in it have felt that way too.
One thing that we got working for NRCS once in a while was really good training in different surprising areas. I won't say that. You know, guess I'd rather be remembered for being somebody that cared than anything else.
And one who didn't.
Yeah. So.
Well, if you decide to change your mind, you can add that in the transcript. Here's what I thought of too.
Well, what I was going to say, you can take this out of the transcript, was that as we deal with supervising and evaluating people, the people who brag about themselves the most and rate themselves highest on self-evaluations are generally the poorest performers. and that always sticks in my mind, because the people that worked for me that were the highest performers did not rate themselves highest. They didn't give themselves the high ratings. They said, we're about in the middle. And I think that's pretty much true across the board when you're dealing with employees. And I don't exempt myself there, so I'm pretty scared to say, brag on what I've done. I've been blessed to have lots of opportunities to do something I enjoyed.
Yeah.
I know people that spent their life. I knew a lady who spent her life making AC Delco spark plugs and just loved it. And 2 days in the factory for me was like an eternity in Hades. So I got to be outside.
Yep.
And really had the opportunity to follow my curiosity through my career. And that's one of the things that we try to get young people to do is don't stop learning. Know that your interest and curiosity is going to change and can lead you who knows where. And that's what happened to me, and that was, like I say, things popped up, and me and my wife talked about it and prayed about it and said, well, let's try this. Worked good, there's plenty of struggles and conflict and conflict with bosses. And that's just part of growing up and figuring out how to interact within an organization.
And did your dad say, good choice, son, after he saw how your career was going?
He was okay with it.
Yeah.
My mom, she had her doubts. My mom thought I was a little too redneck, but that's okay.
No regrets. Bottom line is no regrets from having taken this career path.
No.
Okay, I think Oklahoma's probably been better off having had you for that many years too.
Agreed.
We've made it look like a pincushion. No, it has. It's been a good way to. there's things that I could have done that I made more money at, but I don't think I could have stuck with them. This has given me the chance to. It's given me a chance to have a good career on a, what's the word? On an inverse, or proportionally, on an inverse curve. I did my first job for 16 years just as a soil scientist in the field. And I did my second job for 8 or 9 years as the consultant at Woodward. And then I had about 4 or 5 years as a project leader for the MLRA. and then the assistant and the state soil scientist. So each interval got shorter, and then I changed jobs. But now I've been with the commission for 10 years,
Yeah.
but it's given me a lot of freedom to really be the old guy that does what he wants and helps out people and along the way. But they don't make it hard on me at all. They make it pretty easy on me to be a part of the commission.
So next retirement date, anytime,
Soon?
well, I projected you
No.
10 more years?
No, we laughed. We hired a new secretary at the Conservation District. What are your plans? She said, I'm going to retire from this job. We all laughed. None of us could retire at all because they all got cows.
Yeah. That is
So-
good.
So yeah, I don't, the time may come when I don't do anything, but I don't see it in the near future.
Yeah, hang in there then. All right, well,
Thank you, ma'am.
thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's done. Oh, you're done.
Mhm.
You're done.